But one person who had heard her speak at length by that point was Detective Sergeant Danielle Stonier. She was the officer who spent hour after hour interviewing Lucy Letby when she was arrested. And in our exclusive interview with Danielle, she talked us through what it was like to question someone that she knew could go down in history as one of the worst murderers in modern times.
So I'm Detective Sergeant Danielle Stonier, working on Operation Hummingbird, and I've been involved in the investigation since 2018 as a family liaison officer, but also the interviewing officer for Lucy Letby.
So we were really interested to know a little bit more about that whole experience.
What was she like in those interviews? She's been quite cold and quite controlled in the witness box, she seemed to us. I'm interested to know whether that's what she was like in the police station as well.
I was involved in the interview process for the interviews that took place in 2019 and then again in 2020. Back in 2019 was the very first time I met her. She was arrested and brought into police custody, and I was actually standing in the custody suite when she was brought in by the arresting officers, and I'd say that's the first time I'd seen her in person. I was really thinking about what the next couple of hours, couple of days were going to entail, and obviously you look at a person and think, right, this is going to be the person who I'm going to be spending time with, asking questions and obviously finding out more about her involvement at that time, whether she was involved or wasn't in what she'd been arrested for. It was quite surreal to see her in person. She'd already been interviewed, so I had watched some of the previous interviews for a bit of experience, so I could see how she would react in questions. That doesn't mean to say that she was going to present the same again, bearing in mind she already knew by this point what we were investigating and obviously knew herself at any involvement that she'd had. Again, I'd say from watching her and then to meeting her, it was surreal, to be honest.
You said you had your interview head on, but I wonder, how do you prepare for something like that? What's the training? At that point, 2019, you knew what you were looking at. You'd had the evidence back from the medical experts to say inflicted harm, so you knew what this might be becoming. So this is high stakes, isn't it?
So I'm fortunate that with previous experience within the police, I've interviewed on a number of cases. I worked on the major investigation team, which predominantly dealt with murder investigation, homicides. So preparation is definitely the key. As you say, we had the evidence come through from all the medical experts. So we, myself and my colleague, had spent weeks preparing for these interviews. So we read every single statement. We'd looked at all the medical records. So there is a lot of planning that goes into the interviews because it is a really intense process. You're in quite a small room. She's got a solicitor present. There's 2 interviewing officers.
Although she spoke in the first time round, you don't know that she's going to speak the second time round. She could just go no comment, like a lot of people do.
Part of our planning process is looking at what may happen. So, first thing, is she going to talk? Is she going to answer all the questions we put to her? Or is she going to only answer a couple? And as you say, then go no comment, which they aren't really entitled to do. But we, as interviewing officers, are still entitled to continue asking those questions, even if she chooses to go no comment, because the way we see it is, she may then decide for whatever reason to answer one particular question, whatever that could be. It may trigger something for her, or she thinks, actually, I do want to talk to you about that particular area or topic or answer that question. But the rest of it, I don't want to.
And the experience in this particular one, 2019, 2020, she spoke to you?
She did, yeah, she did. She spoke to us right from the very off, really, from the first question that we posed to her. On both sets of interviews, she spoke. And from that point, you kind of think, well, if she's spoken now, she is going to continue to speak throughout.
Why do you think she spoke to you? That's what I want to know. A lot of people who are facing such serious charges just don't speak to the police, do they? And she gave evidence in the witness box, which, again, a lot of people might have been quite surprised by.
I think what we have to remember is, obviously, we're there as interviewing officers, but we're there as investigators as well. And so for me, we're putting the evidence to you, and this is your opportunity to tell us any involvement you've had or not had. So it's like, if you're saying to me, this is not me, I am not responsible, that, you know, for the allegations that you're putting towards me and the evidence you're giving me, that is not me. I have not done those things. Well, do you know what? Okay, tell me what lines of inquiry to follow to prove that you aren't involved. So you kind of make it a two-way thing, really. You know, you're letting them know why we think they may have involvement, but also, right, okay then, if it isn't you tell us where you were during these times, or tell us where to go to look for that bit of evidence that would assist in proving your innocence. And so I think, in answer to your question is, why do I think she spoke? I think she potentially spoke because she gave full accounts in the first set of interviews. We're then putting to her more kind of witness statements and the medical evidence. And I think she obviously wants to hear that. Potentially, if she was going to go no comment, were we going to disclose further information? I don't know. You know, she's
more
still,
information out of you as
yes,
well.
absolutely. So, you know, we may then be more inclined to say, well, okay, well, you know, such and such a person has said this, you know, well, tell us why they would have said that then.
What we've said, Liz, from being in court and just watching her give evidence is just that calm, not easily rattled. What was the demeanour and was it surprising?
So the Lucy Letby you saw in court giving evidence, for me, was the Lucy Letby I interviewed. Her tone, her approach to answering questions, even so much as kind of the pauses that she gave as well, was very much the same. You know, some of the evidence and the statements that we were putting to her are really, really graphic in detail. You know, and for me, kind of the allegations in itself are horrific. Some people would be flipping the tables, throwing the chairs, banging the doors down, saying, you know, look, you need to go and speak to such and such, you know. I shouldn't be here, you know, that this is completely wrong. Whereas she was calm, she was quite cool about it, she answered the questions, she was confident, she talked, but for me there was little emotion. But what we have to be careful of as interviewing officers is you can't read too much into that because everybody reacts so differently, as we said before.
Did she tell you anything or give you anything that you thought, I think we might just have something there?
In all honesty, I don't. You know, particularly if you're looking at the way she's reacting to hearing the evidence, and particularly this is like her colleagues, you know, that she's worked with that have provided evidence and, you know, discussing, you know, potentially her involvement in murder and attempted murders, you know, and hearing that about your own colleagues, if you aren't responsible, like, I don't know how I would feel, you know, and for me, you kind of look at her and, as I say, there was just nothing from her. She knew the severity of what, you know, she's potentially been alleged of doing. For me, you'd then start to feel the walls closing in a little bit.
She knows that you haven't gone away and thought, oh, there's nothing in this. You know, you're arresting her a second time, then a third time.
Yeah.
What was she like the third time when you got to the kind of charging point?
You have to read out, obviously, the date, the baby that's involved, the allegation, and then you read out the act and section. So imagine doing that on 22 separate occasions. And after each one, she has to acknowledge the charge. You know, you have to stand up and listen as these are being read out.
But a lot of people crumple to the floor, do they?
Absolutely. Yeah. You see all, like I say, you see all kinds of emotions. You know, you do have people who immediately, the natural thing to do is to cry. You know, the natural thing is to cry, and then it becomes uncontrollable. You know, you have other people who will almost just put the fingers in their ears and just completely ignore it and show no interest in it whatsoever. It's the same Lucy Letby we've seen. It's the same Lucy Letby. She has this ability to mentally switch off. I have got to say, these interviews with Lucy Letby has been like nothing I've ever interviewed for before. Nothing. You know, I think it was intense. I think it was challenging at times. I think I certainly felt the pressure, you know, because for us, we have to remain confident, calm. We have to remain particularly focused, you know, and as the amount of time goes on, you naturally become more weary, you know, but your adrenaline is pumping, oh God, throughout the whole time, because with every answer she gives, like, your mind's ticking, like, well, it's like, where am I going to go with this next question? And then also you're thinking, okay, how is that going to fit into the investigation now? What do, you know, later down the line, does that give us some more lines of inquiries to do? Does that help prove or disprove her involvement?
She killed 3 babies in a fortnight in June 2015, and people started asking a few questions, but nobody put 2 and 2 together, really. And then as the year went on, more and more babies started collapsing. And, you know, there was a bit of suspicion about her, but she wasn't ever pulled to one side and said, we've noticed you're on duty every single time. So, you know, who knows what she was thinking. And I actually think afterwards, you know, when she's moved into the admin role, she has the gumption and the bravado almost to put in a grievance.
What you've got to remember about Lucy Letby is, and we've seen that in the text messages and the Facebook messages, she was at the time a valued member of staff. She was in the thick of it all the time. She was receiving praise, you know, by her colleagues. Families appreciated her time and help looking after their babies. She was always in a position, you know, if somebody had phoned in sick or they needed extra shifts covering, it seems to me that, you know, Lucy Letby was somebody that you could go to and you know, you'd be sure that she'd turn up and she'd be available. And I think all this gave her the confidence and that she was a valued member at that time of the team.
Well, actually, what you've just described, which is the most ironic thing when you think about it, is that she was a safe pair of hands for them.
Yeah, but with a safe pair of hands comes opportunity. It's that thing, isn't it? You know, you get away with something for so long, do you become more confident in the acts that you're doing?
In that situation, you trust them completely.
Yeah, absolutely. You would never suspect that your colleague was harming babies, particularly in a neonatal unit. You know, every parent that entered that department is vulnerable. Yeah. They're entirely in the hands of those staff, you know, the professionals, and they take it for granted almost that they're going to have their best interests at heart and they're going to help their baby as much as possible. And at the time, Lucy Letby was going to be that person.
The parents is bad enough, but also the members of staff that, you know, have to carry on working and have to carry on providing treatment for these babies now.
But also the same members of staff who saved so many of these babies' lives as well. How traumatic is that?
Yeah. It's horrific. It is absolutely horrific. And you do have to feel for her colleagues. They must feel that their trust, their judgment as well. You know, because they would never suspect, and they think, you know what, they may think, you know, I'm quite a good judge of character and I've got trust and confidence in my colleagues. And particularly a lot of those times, you know, we've heard the evidence of collapses and you know, when resuscitation's involved, and I wouldn't dread to think what the atmosphere must have been like in those nurseries when they are resuscitating, you know, a baby. It must be horrific. And everybody's got a role and they're all pulling together and working. And Lucy Letby was in the thick of it. And the thought of that, thinking that, well, actually, she put that baby in that position in the first place, but then is a really key role in trying to revive them.
Because, you know, it took some of them a long time to accept that she was responsible because they just didn't want to believe it because she pulled the wool over everyone's eyes.